Present.
Eric Baker, Brett Caldwell, Faces of First Atlanta. This is our Tuesday interview. Not that Tuesdays matter, but how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. How about yourself?
Good. So I want to hear. I've met Eric Baker. I've seen Eric Baker in the hallways. I've seen Eric Baker success on newsletters and recognition. But I want to learn who is Eric Baker?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it depends on the day, but for the most part, it stays about the same. Kind of a loaded question. I mean, I guess the background depends on how far back you want me to go. But born and raised in Atlanta. And my dad's side of the family are all Atlanta natives as well. But my mom's side, my mom is the first generation pretty much here on that side. So if anybody ever wonders why, for being raised down here, I don't have a very heavy Southern accent. That's why. I had a lot of competing accents as a kid growing up, so I think they just all canceled out at some point. But went to college and was kicked out, 100% kicked out of college. And didn't
We're
go
starting
back.
off with brutal honesty. I see. I love it.
Yeah, I am not a sugarcoater. Yeah, not at all. I was fired from my job. I was kicked out of college, had my car repossessed. And so I decided the best route would be real estate, as most vagrants do. And so it actually ended up looking like something that would be a really great combination of all the things that I had interest in when I was a kid. Really wanted
Which
to go
were what? What were your interests as a kid?
Pretty much architecture, houses, anything housing related. That was everything. I got my first AutoCAD program for my 10th birthday. And so while I know a lot of kids were making or playing Xbox and Nintendo, I was designing floor plans. Granted, the first renditions were a little rough, 2-foot wide bathrooms by like 40 feet long with no door, 3 toilets. They got better over time, fortunately. But architecture is really a very solitary career. I'm a little bit more people oriented. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I wasn't sure about architecture. And so I went into marketing and graphic design. And so I did graphic design, marketing, and advertising for a while. And that turns out more of a hobby. And so one of my clients at the bank that I worked at, saw home magazines on my desk because I was just like looking at houses and asked if I wanted to buy a house. And at the time I was 20 and had a part-time job and living at home at mom's house. I'm like, no, no, not hardly. And after telling her kind of like the background, she just looked at me so confused and she was like, why don't you have your real estate license? And I was like, I don't know. And so I started looking into it. And yeah, I mean, within the first month, it was the first time I had ever been anywhere, done anything that the thought of doing it for 20 or 30 years was not absolutely bone-shakingly terrifying to me. And that's how I knew it was like, wow, I think this might really be the right fit.
Yeah. So how long ago was that? When did you get into real estate?
Yeah, so this was almost 8 years ago. September will be the start of my 8th year, which is kind of wild. Depending on the day, sometimes it feels like it was about a week, and sometimes it feels like it's been about 100.5 years.
So 2012. How old were you?
I was 22.
Okay.
And so I got my license and I failed the test 3 times, thought it wasn't even going to happen. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. And then I finally passed, got into it. I was really excited. I wanted to get into it and made $2,000 gross my first year. Living
at mom's.
Yep, living at mom's. It was very rough.
Cliche there, right?
No, not at all. And, I always tell the people who started in real estate, I say, real estate is great. There's no ceiling to your income. Unfortunately, there is also no floor. You can make negative in a year. There is a point that the IRS just goes like, you're fine. Just keep it. We'll catch back up.
Send us the paper. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was one of those moments where I really had to figure out what I wanted to do and really do some soul searching and just like, is this it? Was this what I wanted to do? Or I thought this was what I wanted to do. I thought this was what I was supposed to do. And, you find some of your greatest clarity in those moments. And it was like the most calm, rational self sat next to me and was like, okay, so, well, what can you do? And it's, well, not much with no degree, barely a resume and almost no car. And then the question was, well, what do you truly want to do? And real estate was the only thing. And it was like, okay, well, if that's it, and that truly is the thing, then whatever you have to do to make it work, you have to do. And so I got a job valeting cars in Buckhead. And I partnered with one of the agents in our office who had just spreadsheets worth of just basically phone numbers. It was essentially a glorified phone book. And basically, we just worked out a deal where I would, try to convert those leads and work with her. And I ended up coming into the office at 8 a.m. in the morning and make about 400 or 500 phone calls. And then I changed clothes in the office bathroom, drove down to Buckhead to valet till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, drove back out to mom's house in West Cobb, back in Sandy Springs at 8 a.m., 400 or 500 phone calls, changed in the bathroom. And so it was just that cycle for about 3 or 4 months. Then I finally was sure-footed enough where I was like, okay, I don't need to do the valet anymore, but I still was doing the 400 or 500 phone calls almost for the entire year.
So who were you calling?
A lot of expired withdrawals, because at the time we were just kind of breaking even on the economy crash, the downturn, the recession. And so people were just first able to kind of get out of their houses that they had tried to sell. And so the primary thing was those calls.
So can we talk about that for a sec?
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people would make 400 or 500 phone calls. Why'd you do it?
No, they wouldn't. Because it was a combination of things. One, it was a viable lead generation source at the time because of where we come from. And two, it was a large part of a limiting belief on my behalf because I was very young and my perception was that people my age aren't buying houses. They're not buying houses. They're not moving. They're not doing this. So I have to go through other lead generation sources. And what ended up becoming fascinating was that at the end of the year, I ended up doing 6 million in volume. And only 3 of the 24 transactions I did were from expired withdrawals. All the rest of them were somehow through my sphere of influence and people that I had met. And that was a major light bulb to me that I had been turning my back on all of this gold that was sitting in my database. And it ended up that it wasn't, I did have some first-time home buyers, but it was more their parents, their brothers, their sisters, their siblings. There was so much there that I had turned my back on because of my limiting belief that I put on myself that, oh, I'm too young. They're not moving. They're not doing this. And I had this focus on trying to do these expired withdrawals. And the whole time people are raising their hand behind my back going like, hey,
help.
We're here. You'll just turn around and shine a light on us. And so then it turned that effort and that focus of the 400 or 500 phone calls turned into how many lunches, how many coffees can I have with the people that I already know and that already know me, and how can I dig deeper in that? Because clearly with my back turned, they were still raising their hands. Yep. And that was really the turning point in my business that shifted away from.
This is what, a year in, 2 years in?
This was my second year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. This is
so you're a relationship-based agent.
100%.
But your limiting belief told you, nobody wants to do business with me. I'm too young.
Yep.
I'm going to go call everybody the hard way.
Yeah.
And make 400 calls a day the hard way.
Yep.
Until reality just knocked you over the head.
100%. Yeah. I have a bad habit of really enjoying to do things the really difficult way the first couple of times.
Oh, you're one of those. Okay,
I'm
let's keep going.
One of those.
Let's keep going.
100% one of those. Yeah. I always do the hard part first.
And here's the thing. I want to be clear though. It is a viable source of business. Call sale owners and expireds, right?
It is.
And if you have nobody else behind you going like this, you
Yep.
absolutely should be making those phone calls, right?
100%. And, it depends on your background, where you came from. And I think that has a lot to play with it. And you have to look at what path brought you here and what you're bringing with you. I was born and raised here, so I had a naturally much larger database here than people who say relocated here a year ago would have, right? Because I have those relationships. And so for me, that was the biggest thing. If I was to pick up and move and go to, Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or Dallas or any of these other major cities, my methods of lead generating would be very different than they are right now, because my database and my sphere is going to be very different.
Yep.
And so you have to make that a real big part of your decision making on what types of lead generation work best for you.
Love it. All right. So fast forward, second
Yep.
year in the business, you get knocked over the head with the reality of, hey, Eric's a relationship guy.
Yep.
Yep. So then what?
Yeah, so it was really fascinating what happened, and if you tracked my my volume, it would reflect that. So I did 6 million that year, and then the next year I did 7 million, and then the next year I did 3.5 million, and the year after that I did 4 million, and then last year I went back up to 7 million, and then this year I am on track for about 13 million in
Okay.
volume.
So can we have fun for a second?
Absolutely.
So when somebody asks you what kind of producer are you, what do you tell them?
I'm a top producer.
Oh, you just say top. You don't throw a
Yeah.
number.
Yeah, I'm a top producer.
Yeah, I love it because a lot of people try to define themselves as their best year, and what I'm hearing you say is you realize it's a journey and you're on this roller coaster and you're building it back, right?
100%. And this is always the opportunity that I take with that dip in production, so to speak. Granted, I mean, a lot of people, and I'm cognizant of that, a lot of people would love to do 3.5 or 4 million in volume. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It was a great, it's still a great life. But what was really the deciding factor of what prompted that kind of temporary decline in the volume that I was producing was that I discovered my why was not in the right place. And that, coming from, because we were very poor when I was growing up. We were spent a time of my childhood in a teetering on the edge of homelessness. We never really got to that point, but we certainly flirted with it frequently. The first time I ever had clothes from an actual store, like buying clothes from an actual store, I was a freshman or sophomore in high school. And that was the first time. And I remember being amazed at that you could get the same style in different sizes. Because when you're living the hand-me-down and Goodwill life, you either get a style you like and it doesn't fit, or you get something that actually fits well, but you don't like the style. And that was pretty much it. So the fact that you could combine these two was like mind-blowing to me. So, for so long when I started out on this journey, the reason why I was doing everything and the reason why I was working so hard was because I wanted to break away from that cycle that we had been in. I wanted to stop paying overdraft fees. Some bank executive has a yacht in the Mediterranean with my overdraft fees floating around. So somebody out there has my name on the back of a yacht because of the overdraft fees I've paid. But at the time, that was the biggest motivation to get away. That was what I was driving towards, was I want to break away from this. I want to be financially independent. And what happened was, after the 6 million and 7 million, that next year I was planning and I was sitting down and strategizing about what I wanted to do. And I wanted to continue the increase and do like 9 million in volume that next year. And it was like a sailboat with absolutely no wind. There was no motivation. There was no desire to do anything more, because I was sitting in my office at home, and I'm sitting in a $500,000 house with a $60,000 car, 3 laptops. I don't even know where 2 of them went. I know I bought them. I don't know where they are. I only have 1 of them left. And I just had all of this stuff. And one of the most amazing things is what happens when your perception of success arrives earlier than you were planning. And that is kind of a disheartening experience because you realize I was sitting there and thinking, this is what I was kind of picturing life looking like when I was in my 60s. I didn't think that this is what the 20s were going to look like. Now what? And it was a point in my life where I realized that I wasn't motivated by the money at all. That was the byproduct of what I was doing, but that wasn't the why. And I had to completely reinvent and refigure out why I was doing this in the first place. I didn't know why.
I'm writing this down here. It says, what happens when your perception of success happens faster than you realize? Mm-hmm. So you woke up and you're like, the mountain I've been climbing, the staircase I've been climbing my whole life just reached the top. And you actually had an emotional, you came down from the emotional high of climbing it to begin with.
Yeah, 100%. I didn't know what peak was beyond that. And because could I have bought another suit and been happy for a couple of weeks? Sure. Could I have bought a new car? Sure. It was all such temporary wind filling that sail that I, for the life of me, couldn't really figure out what it was that was going to propel me past that because I wasn't motivated by money anymore. I had everything that I needed. I had more than I needed, and I had everything I wanted at the same time. The wants list had suddenly gone away.
Okay.
And
so what happened?
Yeah. So I really had to go back. And one of the best things I ever did was do 7 levels of why. And so you write down at the top of a piece of paper and say, why? Why am I in real estate? And the first thing I wrote down was because I wanted to be financially independent and have my own business. Why is that important? It's important because I never had that when I was growing up. And I had to be because my dad left when I was a kid. And we didn't have anything. And I was the oldest. I had to be independent. I've always been independent, so I cling on to my independence. Why was that important? Why did that change your perception? And basically, you just go through this and you just continue to ask why. And if you ever try that experiment, it's funny because you almost there's a point where you get mad at it and you get like 4 levels deep and you're just like, that is why. Why? I don't know why. Like, I can't take another why from that. And you walk away from it. You're like, this is stupid. You push it off. But then it resonates in the back of your head and you think about it and you continue to think about it. You continue to think about it. And then over time, it starts revealing itself and you start bringing up things that you didn't originally think about that are sitting in the back of your subconscious. And ultimately, it led me down this path that the reason I always liked real estate and the reason I always liked houses to begin with was because I grew up in an environment where our sense of permanence and our sense of place always felt somewhat at jeopardy. And it was that risk and that uncertainty that drove me to loving to design houses, because I may not be living in a place of permanence and I may not be living in a place by design, but I can create a world of permanence and design that I have complete control over. And the ability to help other people find a place of permanence and a place to call home, that they don't have to be afraid that when they come home at the end of the day, that they may not have a place to lay their head. That ultimately is what drove me into this industry and what I love so much about it. And so when anybody asks me why I'm in real estate and why I do this, it's because I get personal fulfillment out of seeing my clients, whether they realize how important it is or not. Most people won't ever know that because they won't be brought to that edge. But I do, and that's all that matters, because for me, I get my personal fulfillment out of seeing these people move into homes or sell homes that have bad history in them or whatever the case may be, because homes, you can never take away the emotional factor of home, period. I've had clients burst out in tears at the closing table because the house was the last thing that they had after a really traumatic or abusive relationship. And that was the last thing that was holding them in that place and allowed them to start a whole new life. I've seen people move into a home that they never thought they'd be able to move into. Those are the kind of life experiences that fill my sail with all the wind you could ever imagine. And that's what ultimately drives me to wake up every morning and do what I do. It's not always easy. And people get this false sense that, oh, well, you've been doing it for a while. Oh, you have this level of success and you've done this, that, oh, it might it's easier somehow. It's not easier. There's a difference between something being difficult and something being worth it. You can have something that's difficult that's not worth it, and then it's very hard. But you can have something that's difficult and is very worth it that makes the work easy and makes it willing. You have a willingness to do it and a wantingness to wake up every morning and do your job. And
so what's your goal now?
Just to help as many people as I humanly possibly can, whichever avenue that happens to be through. Because during that downturn, I also got involved with a nonprofit organization, Must Ministries. And I just started volunteering with them and just doing side things, because part of that realization was it's not all about me. I'm not doing this business for me. I'm not necessarily doing everything for me. It's not about me all the time. And so I started getting involved with a nonprofit organization. And when I did, I just started doing more and more. And it was after about 6 or 7 months of doing that, the CEO asked me if I would be interested in serving on the board of directors for the organization, which I thought he meant like in 20 years, because I am the youngest board member in the organization's 50-year history by decades. And so I didn't think he meant right now. But they meant right now. And I ended up getting selected to be on the board of directors for Must, and our whole specialization is in homeless rehabilitation. And it's so near and dear to my heart, because that's a place that just by the grace of God, we didn't end up. And if I can do anything in my life that helps change the life of one single person, then that makes everything worth it. And so my goal is to just build as big of a platform as I humanly possibly can to try and just reach one single person. And if at the end of my life, I have ended up changing the trajectory of one single person's life, then everything that I've done is worth it.
I love it. I actually call that a leadership DNA, sir. When you wake up one day and you realize you signed up for something to make a difference that was bigger than yourself, you gravitate towards leadership positions. So I love it.
Thank you.
I'm just sitting here looking at my notes. So I find your journey very inspiring in the sense that, one, you learned about limiting beliefs really early on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure growing up in the circumstances you grew up, there were probably limiting beliefs all over the place, right?
Constantly.
And you learned that the limiting belief, how to power through that early on, which is obviously a mindset of top producers, right? Then you learned how important the emotional motivators are to success. And emotional motivators, we talk about it in lots of different ways, but the simple phrase is that emotion makes people act, right? And whether I'm sitting at a listing table and helping a seller discover their true motivation of why they're moving, or why we should reduce the price, or why we shouldn't overprice a house, logic never connects. Emotion always connects. And you learn that lesson, right? Your statement, what happens when your perception of success happens faster than you realize. Everybody that's successful has had that happen to them.
Yeah.
We chase a carrot, we chase a rabbit, we climb a mountain, we climb a staircase, and there's a little bit, I don't want to use I'll use the word hangover. There's the you reach the top and you go, really?
Yeah.
And what happens is, if we have great coaches and mentors, and sometimes it has to be us to challenge ourselves for what's the next mountain, what's the next staircase, what's the bigger difference, right?
Self-motivation is the indispensable key in success, period.
Yeah.
If you can't get into a place of self-motivation, then it's going to be a painfully difficult road.
Yeah. So what Eric Baker am I going to meet 5 years from now? You'll be, so what, you're 30, right? So you'll be 35 years old.
Just turned 30. Yep.
I did the math. What 35-year-old Eric am I going to meet? What 40-year-old Eric am I going to meet?
Hopefully just a bigger, more expanded, magnified version of who I already am.
Okay.
And, that's one of the things that I have found to be true through everything I've seen and everything I've experienced, is that ultimately, at the end of the day, people don't necessarily change. Money and success and leadership and anything else that happens, they don't change anybody. They expand and magnify who somebody already is. And if somebody had, was very greedy and didn't treat people right in a very small business with 1 or 2 people, then it's going to be the same thing if they're managing a company of 400. Any of those factors are just magnifying glasses. And so 35 and 40-year-old Eric, I just hope that it can just be a bigger magnified version of who I already am and all of the principles that I work so hard to sustain and operate under, and just a bigger and continually growing platform to do what I do.
Yeah. So your average sales price, what's your average sales price?
$374,000.
Okay, so I'm going to use 374,000. Let's use it. So if I said, when's Eric Baker going to break $10 million in sales? What would you say?
That will hopefully happen by November, because I'm close to about 8 million at the present moment.
Okay, so when are you going to break 20?
I would say within 2 to 3 years.
Okay. So at 20 and a $350,000 to $380,000 average sales price, you're helping over 50 families that year.
Yep.
So is it about the 20 million or about the families?
It's all about the families. I use volume as how I track things because I'm kind of a numbers nerd, and I like tracking the overall number.
Yep.
But that has nothing to do, that stands separate from the actual individuals that I'm helping. I always look at it as like, I have a overall goal that I like to achieve because it's an easy measure. Because my price point has fluctuated. There was one year where my price point was actually, my average was 520 something thousand. So obviously I did a lot less numerically, but a bigger volume. So I just track the volume, and however many families that happens to help, that is that's what it's all about. That's what continues me working towards that direction.
I like it. I like it. I think you're primed to explode your business, sir.
Well, thank you.
You're going to break 10 million this year. You've been in the business 8 years. Mm-hmm. You've ridden the up and down journey. So you've obviously created the systems and structure in your business to sustain a good level of production. The coach in me, or the consultant in me, or the team leader in me is saying there is no reason you couldn't help 50 families in 2021.
Yeah. There's not. And, you hit on something that I discovered. It took me years to discover, but it was one of the most indispensable pieces that has allowed me to scale the way that I have been able to scale recently. And it was just kind of like a light bulb. We have a tendency, particularly when we're early on in this business, to make sacrifices on our system depending on who we're working with. Oh, they're my friend. We don't have to have that conversation. Oh, that's a family. Oh, well, they were referred by this person. Well, I can do something. And the conversations and the appointment that we have with somebody who is a complete stranger that we met at an open house looks wildly different from the conversation you have from somebody that your brother recommended you to.
Of course.
And that was one of the biggest mistakes of business building that I made. And I finally came to the awareness that you cannot standardize the people. And if you operate in that process, you are constantly trying to standardize the people you're working with, and you will always fail. You can only standardize the process. You can only standardize the process. You cannot standardize the people. And if you standardize the process, the people will fit into the system, and it allows you to have 12, 13, 14 houses under contract at one time, because you know you've had the same conversation, the same expectations, and the same communication with every single one of those people. And the allowance for conflict reduces down to such a thin margin that you should not have those experiences. But if you try to constantly change the process and let the process mold around each individual person, you are constantly owning a business that is in flux. So you cannot standardize the people. You can only standardize the process, and that is it.
I love it. What would you do if you sold 50 family homes next year? What would you do for Eric?
Try to do even more. What would I do for me? That would be, for one, giving a percentage of it back to my nonprofit. That's huge. I try to do about 10% of every single commission goes directly back to the homeless rehabilitation that we do through MUST.
So 50 homes is roughly 20 million. That's 600,000. So that would, you would be contributing over $50,000 to that ministry.
Yep.
So now you got 50 families, $50,000 going to the ministry in 2021. What's the director's name so I can send him this video? Eric, here's my last question for you, boss.
Yes, sir.
You're gonna write a book or give a TED talk. What's Eric Baker's story? What's your topic?
I would probably call it The Power of One, because I think people take advantage of how much power and magic there is in the power of one. 1 year, one person, one conversation, one family, one house. We try to bite off this monster, just elephant at one time, and we consistently do that to the jeopardizing of what we need to be doing. And I've had people ask me before, well, I'd love to do some of the nonprofit work, but there's just so much need, and it's just such a great, there's such a great need that I just feel like, that I couldn't, knowing that I can't help everybody would just prevent me from doing that. And I always go back to them, and I always tell them, if what you did just in a few weeks or a few months or a year or 2 years, if all of that just helped save one single person, you're telling me that wouldn't be worth it?
Right.
You cannot tell me that. And if that's the case, then you need to do some soul searching, because there is so much power. If one person can affect one single life, then that should be the motivator. And we overestimate it, commonly shared, but we overestimate what we can do in a short period of time and underestimate what we can do in a long period of time. And so many people, if they just focused on one person, one conversation, one house, one family, and just did that for 1 year, I am living proof that your life 1 year can be drastically different at the end than it was at the beginning.
Yeah. So what's the last digit in next year's number?
The last digit, that's in the millions. 0. 2021? 1. Yes, that is right. Yeah.
Now you put it out there.
I love that. Yep.
What do you do next year, Eric?
1.
Have a good one, sir. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course.